The Capital Confidential podcast is brought to you by the Times-Union, the leading newspaper in New York's capital region. Subscribe today or visit online at timesunion.com.
And now I recognize that that was just, youthful folly, and I'm trying to get into more reasonably hopped pale ales. Once again, got good ones in Ireland.
You want to deport an undocumented person? Start with me, because I'm an undocumented person.
How do we beat him in an election?
We will. I'm going to run against him.
I wish you would. I wish you would, Dad. I would.
There are things in here that are unobjectionable because they're not that effective. So yeah, sure, I'll vote for a distinctive license plate. Sure, why not?
Jim, you had your press conference at 4 o'clock.
You're having a press conference now?
That's
You're
right.
talking?
I'm having a press conference.
Well,
now.
is this your space here or is it public?
No, it's my space.
Oh, this is your
Don't
space.
interrupt.
Okay.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is the Capital Confidential Podcast. Today's show is a broadcast of the CapCon Awards from Wednesday. So unfortunately, you won't enjoy any of the visual gags or my midnight blue tuxedo, but you will get the full audio experience. Enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to the first annual Capital Confidential Awards, or as they're known in the biz, the CapCons.
CapCons.
Exactly, yes. I'm David Lombardo, Capital reporter and host of the Capital Confidential podcast. My awards co-host, analyst, and style guru is Casey Styler, an alum of the Times-Union's Capital Bureau and the occasional funny behind the TU CapCons Twitter feed. Casey, thanks for joining me today.
Dave, thanks for having me on. I would just, hold on, I've got to adjust that. You're getting a bit Mr.
God.
Peepers there with the bow tie. Okay, much better.
It's like my first time in the penguin suit.
No, you've totally outdressed me once again.
Well, because politics is a mix of sport and drama, our awards will reflect that dynamic. The winners were chosen by an unscientific poll, and they're all subject to debate. Unlike other award shows, though, we're going to get right to things with our first award, and that's our session champion, who we are crowning as Andrea Stewart-Cousins. Without conceding any power, except maybe the moral high ground in the Me Too movement, Stewart-Cousins grew her conference by 8 members. Then she added 2 more while riding the blue wave. She got to flex some of that partisan muscle and this spring, and some political observers argue she's sitting pretty heading into November. Casey, what do you think of this pick by the judges? Is Stewart-Cousins the big winner of the session?
Yeah, I think you'd have to say so, but then, of course, it comes with the question of what exactly you get right now with that win. I mean, essentially, as we saw at the end of session, because, of course, it was only in the second half that the IDC dissolved, giving Andrea Stewart-Cousins and the mainline, is what over the course of the last 7 years we've been calling the mainline Democratic Conference, this much mojo. It only could be used to block things or to make things difficult for the Republicans in much the same way that the narrow Democratic majority way back in 2009 and 2010.
Trip down memory lane.
Yeah, exactly. Could only be used to make things difficult for Democrats. Now, Democrats didn't make things difficult for Republicans this year anywhere close to the way that Republicans made things
4 bills
difficult,
failed.
For Democrats in those freighted years. But without a doubt, the biggest development in the legislature over the course of this session was the dissolution of the IDC, which could not help but empower Andrea Stewart-Cousins and the mainline Democrats.
And when this came on our radar in December, it was a proposal of some sort of leadership agreement with Klein, something akin to what he enjoyed with Skelos and then Flanagan, where he was the de facto co-leader. That is not the case. I mean, Klein is not the number 1A. He's number 2, and Stewart-Cousins is 1. I mean, she didn't have to give up anything, it seems.
Right, and let's remember that this was the exact same role that Jeff Klein held in 2009 and 2010 when he was the deputy Democratic leader, a role that he bagged out of to set up the IDC at the very beginning of 2011. So Klein is right back where he was before. He was forced to concede and do something that he insisted for years he would never do, which was allow the IDC to go bye-bye. He always said, whatever power sharing or arrangement or reconciliation we might have with mainline Democrats, the IDC will absolutely remain a separate and unique conference within the chamber. That has now gone by the boards almost entirely, with the exception of, right now, the fact that the money that the IDC raised through its partnership with the State Independence Party, or as I like to think of it, the Free Beer Party, will only go towards assisting IDC candidates in their primary battles, and one would assume in the general election as well, if they clear those primary battles brought by mainline and progressive incumbents.
Right.
And we're talking a day after the congressional
NY14.
primaries, which, especially in the race that unseated Joe Crowley, presents or could present significant problems, could be sending a shiver up the spines collectively and individually of some of those former IDC Dems in the Senate.
And do we have any idea what Stuart Cousins will be if she is the leader? What kind of leader would she be if she runs the chamber? She's obviously not Malcolm Smith. She's not Pedro Espada. Is it too soon to tell? And obviously we haven't even had the November elections, but is it too soon to tell what her stamp on the Senate majority might be?
Just beyond a basic civility and class. That really has been her dominant, mode of leadership for these last couple of years. Now that is much easier to do in the minority than it is when you're in the majority, and you've already seen her have to navigate difficult questions because, of course, as you noted in your introduction. The fact that Jeff Klein was accused of forcible kissing by a former staff member.
An issue that's still under review.
Allegedly, we don't know. Yeah. We don't know because Jay Cope is, of course, a black box. Right. The matter has been referred to Jay Cope, but of course Jay Cope isn't going to tell us if they're doing it or not. But that accusation has presented some difficulty for mainline Democrats. It is, however, a far less complicated thing to accept than all of the baggage that the mainline Democrats had to accept back in 2009 and 2010 when you had somebody like Pedro Espada Jr., who was an absolute, just more baggage than Samsonite. And what Klein is alleged to have done certainly presents difficulties, but in terms of public corruption, it's nowhere near what the Democrats faced in having to not only kind of absorb Pedro Espada and then of course make him
and Montserrat too.
Majority leader. And Montserrat of course, but of course Montserrat was a special case because Montserrat was driven out of the chamber very quickly. There was a process involved there, and it did create schisms and divisions within the conference. But ultimately, the Democratic conference was able to say, Montserrat did wrong, we kicked him out. Yeah. And so far, there's been no type of action like that.
Easy for them to do, though, when they're in the minority and with not the likelihood of taking the majority back, though, at that point.
What, you mean when Montserrat went?
Yeah.
No, they were in the majority when Montserrat got deposed.
But then didn't Peralta come in and take that seat, really fast after that when there was a special election?
Oh yeah, exactly, yeah.
But like most good award shows, I think we've kind of tipped our hands because the first award's been indicative of some of the future awards, and the next one is the best original storyline of this year, which was the end of the IDC. In April, like we mentioned, a 7-year power sharing agreement in the Senate came to an end. This narrative worked on many levels. It upset the status quo in the Senate, ended the 4-way leaders meeting, and changed the dynamic for the fall primaries. Casey, we kind of touched on this already, but what did it mean for the last 7 years to have Jeff Klein as co-leader? Did it have a serious impact on legislation? I think if you talk to Klein, he would point to paid family leave as a big priority that they championed, some of the gun control things like the SAFE Act in 2013. What is his legacy in that position?
I would say his legacy is as a cat's paw for Governor Cuomo.
Okay.
I think every issue that Cuomo would, or rather that Klein would point to as being an IDC accomplishment, is something that was shoveled through the Senate more through Cuomo's work and influence than Klein's work. Klein was able to kind of ride the coattails of those, but those measures, with the exception of the 2 years, 2013, 2014,
Right.
when the IDC was needed by Republicans
Yeah.
to actually control the chamber, the rest of the time it was Cuomo making deals with Senate Republicans and the Assembly Democrats, including, first Sheldon Silver and then Carl Hastie, that got that legislation over the hump that involved the horse trading. I really don't think you can give Klein that much credit. He, of course, would immediately claim it.
So it sounds like you're not a believer that it's a real true four-way leaders meeting. Like, what was Klein just off in the corner and just saying, yeah, Cuomo, that's a good point, whatever? Or do you think he was not an active and serious participant in those meetings?
I think any honest assessment of the last 7 years is that the most important figures in the state Senate by far were Dean Skelos and then
John J. Flanagan?
John Flanagan, excuse me, my throat got.
And you touched on this, but we are expecting at this point 8 primaries for the 8 former IDC members. I think that it's fair to say before yesterday, the most serious one was probably to Marisol Alcantara, who was facing a re-election bid challenge against Robert Jackson, who she faced off in a 3-way race in 2016. Why do we think that yesterday's results bode badly, for IDC members, former IDC members, because these are people who sort of champion their progressive bona fides, I guess. They claim that, they are the far left. They are the progressives that people want. Is it just the case that they've partnered with Republicans?
Yeah, if that's the case, then why were they partnered with Republicans over the course of the last
so they could get things done,
almost
I guess.
Year and a half? Yeah, that's what they're going to claim. They're going to claim, look, the state government managed to give you, the legislature and the governor managed to give you these progressive accomplishments. They are, however, going to have to answer for the progressive things that did not get achieved,
Right.
whether it's passage of the DREAM Act,
And that's a
whether
big one for
it's
Peralta.
Yep, or codification of Roe v. Wade in state law,
Yep.
which has been another one of these wedge issues that has been held up by Democrats as saying the only thing that stands in the way of our achieving this is the fact that the IDC is partnered with Republicans.
Right.
And they will have those things to answer for.
Although in reality, even though there are a majority Democrats right now,
Yeah,
the composition of that Democrats wouldn't even allow for that passage, because I don't think Simcha Felder would go for the codification of the Roe v. Wade. I don't think he'd jump on board with that.
Right.
So,
but if you're Jeff Klein and you want to get Roe v. Wade codified in state law, who should you partner with to achieve that?
Exactly. That's a good
Republicans
point.
who are even blockading the possibility of a vote to get it on the floor,
Fair
which they
enough.
did once again
Right.
in recent weeks, in the last couple of weeks of session, or with Democrats who are almost entirely on board with that measure.
Well, that's a good time for us to take a quick break and recognize our sponsor. Our sponsor for today is Michael Strahan. He dresses us for all of our occasions. His J.C. Penney line of tuxedos is our preferred choice for all awards events hosted by the Times-Union, and we encourage anyone to check them out.
Is that a clip-on?
This is not technically, I guess, a clip-on because it goes all the way around. But yes, it is not a self-tied.
That's still a clip-on
bow tie. Wow,
Yeah.
that hurts.
Yeah,
That
I
hurts.
can teach you how to tie a bow tie.
Thanks, Dad.
No problem.
And back to the show. Next up is the best adapted storyline. This year it's Zephyr Teach Out 2.0. And no, this is not a recognition of the constitutional law experts' latest campaign. For those keeping track at home, this is now 3 and 5 years. Now, this award is recognizing the Democratic primary for governor. Normally, sequels aren't very good because, it's just a rehashing of an old plot. But sometimes you get a gem. Godfather 2, D2, The Mighty Ducks, Empire Strikes Back. This primary between Cynthia Nixon and Andrew Cuomo has been a winner already, and the primary is still 2 months away. Nixon's entrance into the race this spring completely upset New York's political landscape, as political observers and GOP critics of the governor all agreed that Cuomo was motivated by his new opponent. the argument has been made, including by Nixon's campaign, that last week's news about legalizing weed, the restoration of voting rights for parolees, and a host of other left pivots by the governor are a response to Nixon. Flanagan and others have maintained the focus on the primary meant Cuomo wasn't focused on governing the last few months of session. Casey, are the stakes really higher in the sequel, or has Cynthia Nixon's campaign only existed in the minds of Capitol insiders and reporters desperate for a story to cover in the summer?
I would say I think we can over attribute the progressive moves that Cuomo is making now merely to the presence of Cynthia Nixon. I think, and I want to make this clear, that she has definitely played a role in that. But you have to remember that Cuomo would still be making many of these moves anyway in an election year. Because it's an election year. Yeah, and in an election year, he is trying to drive Democratic turnout. This year, he has a major ally in driving Democratic turnout, and that is Donald J. Trump.
So the national trend action, which was a lot of the thing that the governor focused on in the last month or two.
Yeah, he's going to try and drive up his numbers, not only in the primary, of course, but also in the general election, because he wants a big win. And I would say the impulse that's driving that is opposition to Trump, and also it's the progressive moves that the governor is making.
At this point, is Nixon a paper tiger? Does she exist as a real candidate? She hasn't even qualified for the Democratic primary yet. The governor, easily won the endorsement and is the designee of the Democratic Party, whereas Nixon now needs to qualify for the ballot with collecting petitions, which is a real uphill battle. She needs to get a whole campaign apparatus across the state. Is it too soon to tell, what kind of challenge she'll actually mount in September?
Well, we saw a lot of early momentum from her, and you've been covering this more closely than I have over the course of the last 2 months or so. But wouldn't you say that it seems like some of that momentum has been lost over the course of the last 6 weeks?
I would say that any momentum she has hasn't translated into polling because...
Right. I mean, we definitely see that in the latest Siena poll where her numbers are basically stagnant and the governor is inching up.
Yeah, and more than just the head-to-head matchup between the two, I look at their favorable ratings amongst Democrats who are going to be the ones voting in this primary, and the governor's popular among Democrats, and she is not well known amongst Democrats, which makes it seem like the challenge that Joe Crowley faced on Tuesday is not a fair analogy. I don't think that you can say that the governor is Joe Crowley and Cynthia Nixon is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Is that correct?
Close enough.
Well, for now, I better get to know it pretty soon. I think, now that she's going to be a member of Congress.
Probably, yes.
But it seems like there was a lot of centralized dissatisfaction where I think in the state as a whole, I think the governor's going to have an easier time holding on. Or do you think is that a fair assessment or no?
Well, the fact that she's probably going to be a member of Congress and you had to fight to choke out her name indicates that anything can happen in this great world of ours. So I think if you had put the question to a lot of Joe Crowley supporters about, well, has she built up enough momentum and is she going to get over the line, they would have scoffed, and they ain't scoffing today, that's for sure. That is it's certainly a reminder, just as it should be to all those IDC incumbents, former IDC incumbents, and also to it should be to the governor as well, that what do we got now, 10 weeks until primary
September
day?
13th.
Anything can happen. One of the governor's prime movers of upstate economic development, Elen Calleros, along with a bunch of executives who were major donors to the governor, are currently on trial.
Right.
Who knows what's going to come out of that?
There's a reason to expect we'll get a conclusion before the primary.
Oh God, I hope so.
Yeah, I have no idea how long trials last.
If not, we will have to put Rob Gavin, who is covering the Calleros trial for us, on some kind of major disability by the time he gets done. But absolutely. I mean, the expectation is certainly by mid-July. Who knows what could happen in a jury room? But by mid-July, there ought to be verdicts in that case, yay or nay.
And in 2014, when Cuomo had a primary challenge, he had to make some deals with the Working Families Party. That's not happening this time around.
Mainly because Cuomo has worked assiduously to undercut the Working Families Party and deny it, or to cut its, to sever, to poison its relationships with many of the big institutional union donors who used to shore up that party, and who also managed to narrowly swing the nomination for Cuomo in 2014.
And this week we saw the governor secure the endorsement of CSEA, which is a union that he has not had the support of in any of his past gubernatorial bids. So I think that he's well positioned on the labor front for heading into that primary. But I guess we'll have to wait and see, and hopefully it remains an interesting race to cover. And our final player in this act is the least valuable player. Unfortunately, it's a sad responsibility, but we have to hand this award out, and that goes to the budget. Casey, you can remember when the budget used to be full of policy headlines, like an aging superstar. Though it just seems that the budget lost a step this year. In years past, the governor's championed and accomplished paid family leave, raised the age, a minimum wage increase, and this year, though, the budget largely revolved around getting loopholes to new changes to the federal tax code. The proposals made it in the budget. Remains to be seen how effective they'll be, whether New Yorkers will take advantage of them. Besides that, maybe the other headline was a sexual harassment policy, which still hasn't actually been crafted yet.
Right.
But it was a big headline, I guess. Casey, did the budget have an off year? Can it return to its prominence, or is it time to trade the budget?
Well, election year budgets are always or usually going to be fairly sleepy. This one was especially sleepy, I think, because of the the unrest, the imminent unrest in the Senate. We right before the budget passed was 3 weeks before the special elections that kind of upset the apple cart in the Senate. Everybody knew that was going to be a significant deal. People saw the writing on the wall.
2 seats were up for grabs that could potentially swing the majority if somehow Simcha Felder joined them as well.
Right,
and the IDC.
The big one, of course, went to Shelley Mayer. That was the one that was seen as the most contested.
Do you think that hung over the budget process?
I think so, to a certain extent, and that's a phrase I said I would never use in any kind of political discussion again.
Hung over?
No, to a certain extent.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a long story.
What
But
did that stem from, Casey? Do you want to talk about it?
Very quickly, if I can ask people.
Do we have time? We have time.
Okay. The first time I ever did a chat show interview with Alan Chartock, I was trying to be deferential to this
smartest
notable,
man in Albany?
legendary political commentator, and so I used that phrase to a certain. Every time he would say something, I would say to a certain extent when I wanted to disagree with him. And my wife and I were listening to this podcast when we were, or not the podcast, but the WMC radio program, when we were on a drive through the Catskills, and I realized that I had used that phrase quite literally about 20 times over the course of a 25-minute discussion. And my wife first called me on it maybe the third time I used it and said, "Are you going to say to a certain extent throughout this entire discussion?" And I was like, ha, ha, ha. And then I proceeded to say it over and over again.
Brutal.
And every time I said it, it was just like a lash across my back. And my wife just cackled, to a certain extent.
Okay.
And so that's why I don't use it anymore. And I just used it with you, probably because I have the same respect for you that I have for Alan Chartock.
Thank you. I'm going to assume that means a lot. And the budget process this year, there weren't any things that were really pushed in public. Is that simply because it's an election year? Is it because nobody wanted anything? I mean, is it mission accomplished or what?
Well, in terms of the various ethics reforms that were proposed, I think that you could say it didn't get through because there was a looming corruption. There was one corruption scandal that was about to wrap up, right? The Percoco verdict came, I think, just a week, maybe a week and a half after the budget got done. No, it was beginning of March. That's right. It was the beginning of March.
I was not yet a Times Union employee.
That's right. And we call that the dark days. But
I don't know how you got to
that's
paper
right.
out.
The verdict was first week in March, but by the second week of March, the budget train is really moving down.
Yes.
You're not going to get big reforms in, no matter what had happened in the Percoco trial. But And then, of course, you had the Calleros trial looming. So for some reason, despite the fact that these two trials were going on, the retrial of Sheldon Silver, the retrial that's going on right now of Dean Skelos, apparently nobody thought that now would be a good time to pass any kind of meaty ethics reform, such as the establishment of, the creation of a database of deals.
Which did pass the Senate once they kind of had their schism with the IDC and once they wanted to stick it to the governor.
Right, exactly. And I think you saw
My
that.
words, not them, though.
No,
they wouldn't say that.
I think that's a fair interpretation. And the governor's opposition to, or apparent opposition, although I think he has paid lip service to the idea of creating that kind of database, according to some, prevented it from getting to the floor for a vote in the Assembly.
Child Victims Act was one of the things that the governor put in the budget, put in elections reforms, even actually put in money to expand, to create early voting in New York. That fell through the wayside. One thing that did make it at the very end actually wasn't a budget bill, but was a gun control bill that had to do with domestic violence offenders and their ability to keep guns.
Would make it easier to take guns away from those found to be.
I mean, that got its way through the Senate at the very last second. I was actually on the floor while that was happening, and there were a lot of angry Senate Republicans during that process. They were griping amongst themselves. A bunch voted no. But I think that was indicative, to a certain extent, of the governor's ability to push things through, because this was not one of their priorities, and yet it did get done. So does that mean that the governor was only choosing to push his weight on certain issues, or that the Senate Republicans were only willing to give on certain issues?
Probably a little bit of both.
A little bit of column B.
Probably a little both.
Gotcha.
That which is the legislative way.
Right.
That's exactly how the system is supposed to work, especially when the two houses are controlled by different parties. You give a little and you get a little. That's the democratic system.
Unless you're the Assembly, in which case you just say, no thanks, we're good. Senate, you can concede something.
But the governor has always made it clear that in the budget he will swap out and shop non-fiscal legislation, no matter how much he makes it a point to include these things in the budget. They will almost always fall out when it becomes clear that fiscal issues are gonna dominate, and the governor sets that agenda largely because he has so much power in the budget. So
done. Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I didn't cut you off again. But
no.
That's a wrap for us. Casey, thank you so much for joining us on the first annual Capitol Confidential Awards, the CapCons, as they're known in the biz. Just really, really appreciate you lending your voice and analysis here.
Well, Dave, thanks for having me, and I'm so glad that people could join us in my office here.
It's well lit, and if you want to,
I don't know about that. This is a glare.
Yeah, that's
going
to be a problem for future years to fix.
We'll fix it in post.
And you can listen to this conversation on the Capitol Confidential podcast, which is released every Friday. Subscribe wherever you download podcasts: iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn. It's available at all of those places. And thank you again to Deloitte for calculating our results and tabulating everything and making sure it was all kosher vegan. And until next time, podcast and Facebook Live adjourned.
Just heard I tried to get you.
This day sucks.